if you say something, everybody has a right to criticize you. That's the nature of free speech. You got to stick your head up. You got to take a stand. You got to be willing to suffer the slings and arrows. If you're a scientist, same thing, right? Other scientists are going to disagree with you. They're going to take it to you. You're going to take it to you hard. You're in the game. We're in the game of life. Hello, and welcome to the Academy on Capitalism's YouTube video channel. Today we're going to talk about free speech. But before I do that, if you like the video, make sure you hit like and subscribe. We have other great videos. I invite you to explore them, both shorts and long forms, covering many topics, including current topics and things of intellectual interest as well, like the Roman Empire. So please join us. We enjoy having you here. So today, free speech. Well, I think from both the left and the right, the idea has gained popularity that if we can restrict the wrong speech and ideally just keep it to the right speech, then the world will be a better place. Either we will treat our fellow humans better because we will talk better to them and not be able to talk badly about them or refer to them in bad ways, or our country will somehow be stronger and safer because only those who support the right things will be speaking, and that will make the country stronger, and we'll exclude those who wish to undermine the United States, the presidency, or the Constitution, whatever. Pick your goal. But if we can just keep them quiet, once again, the idea being that we will be stronger for that. And this idea needs to be put to rest quickly. Free speech is a fundamental right, okay? But here's what I want to do. We're going to go through some arguments. But I got a little Marcus Aurelius here, Meditations. Really great book to read it. And Marcus Aurelius here talks about, let's see here. One of the quotes from the Meditations is, "What is this fundamentally? What is its nature and substance, its reason for being? What is it doing in the world? How long is it here for?" And I think, right, Marcus Aurelius was a Caesar. I mean, he ran the Roman Empire, or he's in charge of it anyway. I think he's reminding himself that you don't want to be distracted. You want to get to the fundamentals because it's by getting to the fundamentals that you find answers that are workable. You find answers that are moral. You find answers that actually work and do something, right? I know this is an odd analogy, but you watch prize fighters. They're not out there flailing all around, right? They choose their shots. They go for there's a purpose to their shots. And it makes them much more effective fighters than just the random person who's swinging around, right? You want to know your target and you want to aim at it. That's the target you want to hit. Okay, so while we're talking about free speech, we're going to go through some topics and different arguments for free speech. Okay, I'm not going to do the arguments against free speech here. You can find those elsewhere. Okay, but I'm going to go through those arguments for free speech, but in an attempt to start to drill down to find out what really matters, like what's really underlying this, okay? The arguments we're going to go through are good ones, but I really want to try and get to the heart of the matter here, okay? So, first off, and I got some notes here sometimes I'm going to look down at, all right? Because sometimes I get off topic and I don't want to do that. Not for free speech. This is just way too important. So, the first thing that we need to remember, right? This is the Academy on Capitalism and Limited Government. Why limited government? Why capitalism? Well, one of the first points is centralized power is dangerous. Okay? It always has been. Lord Acton says power tends to corrupt. Absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. It corrupts both the person and it will corrupt the area being governed. Why? Well, you've put all your eggs in one basket. And, if the centralized power gets it right, okay, I admit it's good for, but if they get it wrong, then it's wrong for everybody. And it's devastating, okay? It's absolutely just devastating. And with no checks on power, of course, power just grows, and power tends to seek more power. And that's power over people, power over you, power over me, power over others around us, right? Let's make no mistake about this. This is not power over my pen or something. This is power over people, to tell them what to do. And if they don't do it, we're going to get a gun and we're going to put you in jail, or we're going to do something awful to you. So you do this or go to prison, or worse, die. Right? So, yeah, centralized power, very dangerous thing. This is why the framers wrote the Constitution. They saw it firsthand. There were kings. And power was centralized in the king or queen. And you had a lot of awful things happen. That's why the freedom of religion is written into the First Amendment. I mean, read about the 30 Years' War. It's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous what people did to each other over beliefs. We tend to forget that today. We kind of think it doesn't matter if one's Lutheran or if one is Catholic or one is independent church. We just, go your own way. That's because we've internalized that part of the First Amendment. But it wasn't always like that. And it doesn't have to stay like that either. Once again, we're doing free speech here precisely because I am hearing people saying things like, it's okay to resort to violence against those who do not speak the way you think they should speak. So we're creeping back to that. And the wars of religion were terrible, absolutely awful, over what people believed. They used to stake people out over badger holes and then smoke the badger out. The only way the badger could get out was to eat through you. There's human beings doing this to each other over belief systems. And the framers were well aware of this. So they ensconced it in the First Amendment. And I think that's why free speech is there too. Because that's part of it. You've got to be able to talk about what you believe. Whether it's religion and God or politics, right? You need to be able to express yourself. You can't just live in fear. And if we don't allow people to express themselves, well, historically we've seen violence can ensue. And the most horrendous of violence. So we do have a First Amendment protection on free speech, right? Now, is that the foundation? Is that what we want to rest our argument on? I don't think so. It's an important law that governs the land here in the United States. So it's not an unimportant thing, but it rests on something else. It has to. Or else it's just some sort of arbitrary edict by a bunch of dudes back in the 1700s, right? And why should I take their word for it? Why should, why does their voice have any authority if that's all it is? Okay. And also, too, we have this problem now that's bubbling up, that people are arguing that the Constitution only applies to citizens, and that the Constitution does not apply to those visiting here or those here without documentation or illegally, however you want to put it, okay? That the Constitution only covers a subset of humanity. I believe that's a mistaken interpretation of the Constitution, but it's out there. And in order to effectively counter that, we can either have a long constitutional debate, which will take us to the essence of the Constitution, or we can stick with free speech and talk about why free speech, whether it's the First Amendment or whether it's something else, really does and should apply to everybody. Everybody should have the right to speak freely without fear of consequence. And we're talking about the government. So without fear of consequence from the government. Other consequences we'll get to later. So why might that be then? Why might it be that this free speech protection ought to be extended to anybody, right? To start with, within the borders of the United States, but ideally within the world, it ought to be. It isn't in many, many, many places. But it ought to be. And by the way, just as an aside, if you're one of the top, if not the top economy or country in the world, why would you want to copy the strategies of second through last? Why would you look to other, look what they do. Maybe this has been a good place, a great place, if not the best place, precisely because, we buck the trend. We let people speak and say what they want. And I think that's proven to be a winning strategy. But with that aside, what's the moral reason? If you care about being ethical, if you don't, well, there's nothing I can do, right? You might disagree with me in this argument, but if we disagree because we both desire to do the right thing and be ethical and treat people well and have strong communities, then yeah, we have a great discussion. But if somebody just doesn't give a damn, there's nothing anybody can say, right? It's a sociopath. So we both care about what's right. We might have different opinions. We might have the same opinion. I'm just going to share with you here some arguments as to why, once again, ethically free speech ought to be extended to everyone. Now, the first reason is, and this comes out of John Stuart Mill on liberty, of all titles. It talks about how important free speech is and why it should be protected. And one of the arguments that he runs, quite an interesting argument, is that truth or finding the truth requires experimentation. We're not omniscient beings. We are entirely finite beings and entirely fallible beings. We can be wrong. And you know what? We often are wrong in our own lives, in our opinions and judgments of others. Just wow, we can get things wrong a lot as individuals, right? Yours truly included. And in order to find out whether I'm wrong, I need something to compare it to. I need something to, right? I need to see like what's the other, because what's the alternative? If there's no alternative, maybe I'm wrong, but then there's nothing else I can do. So, right? I need to know these other alternatives. I need to know what else is out there. What other theories? And this could apply to science, right? Whether the theories about gravity or Newtonian or Einsteinian or relativity. I need to know what else is out there. What do I have to work with? And then that gives my mind something then to follow and test and read about and figure out. And if I'm a scientist, well, that's what I'll do. I'll read the other scientific theories that are out there. Maybe even come up with my own that bucks the trend. And I need to be free to say that because maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. But if I'm right, well, a lot seems to hang on that in science, right? Engineering, biochemistry. I mean, there are things that can make our lives a lot better that hinge on scientific discoveries. And it would be devastating, beyond being able to explain, to stop a correct discovery that could lead to better and greater things. Okay, so in science we see that. And in science we generally recognize that. But the same is true in politics. People can be wrong all the time. Economics, you name it. And the only way to figure that out is, well, you got to let people in the arena. People will have their data, people will have their arguments, and then other people get to feed back on that. And then other people watch, right? And try and decide, whose argument's better or whose argument do I think fits better. Somebody's ready to write the comment, you're assuming people are rational, and we're looking at people and they are decidedly not acting rationally. Like if we look at social media, people tend to just believe one source come hell or high water. Everybody has their own conspiracy theories. Everybody has their own theories of how the world's going to end, right? And it really is crazy out there when you look at what people latch on to as the truth and then try to spread that on the internet. I get that. Ain't nothing we can do about that, right? And by the way, God forbid one of those people who end up in centralized power, then wow. So there's nothing we can do. The only hope you have is that the people who are trying to figure things out and the people who are trying to rationally, right, look at data, look at the arguments, try to find what works, right, the essence of it all. The only hope we have is to let them do that. And see, here's the thing about law. If you ban speech, or if you ban certain opinions, everybody gets nailed with that. So yeah, you catch the idiots, right? They can't spread their idiocy. And I'll open myself to the shop, but there's no distinguishing them between me, right? Or you. It's a blanket law. It applies to everybody. Nobody gets to say that. Whether they're being sensible or unsensible, whether they've read up on the matter or just woke up in the morning with a bad hangover and searched their Facebook page, whatever. it catches everybody. And so that's the danger there. I'm not assuming everybody looks at things, right, rationally. And in fact, you and me, right, you're watching this. There's no way in the world we can read everything about everything. So there'll be some things that we're really well informed on. And there'll be other things that we believe or we think are right, but we haven't really researched at all. Maybe read an article or heard something. Maybe read a book if you're lucky. But even then, I can't read a book on everything, right? I do and believe and like. Nobody can. So guess what? Each of us as individuals, we have areas where we're very smart and informed and rational, and we have areas where we can be idiots. And once again, the law doesn't distinguish that. The law doesn't distinguish between what mode you're operating in. If speech is silenced, it's silenced, and it's silenced for everybody, no matter what. So in order to let those voices that are really seeking the truth and really attempting to arrive at some kind of solution or whatever, you got to let everybody free. I mean, that's just how it works. That's how the law works. The law is not going to single out individuals. That's not what it does. It's not what it can do. It's not what it should do. It's not law then. So yeah, experimentation is important, and the only way you're going to get that, and the only way you're going to get the feedback you need to find the truth, is just leave people free to talk. And that can lead to better lives, right? And as I said, too, better science and the rest. But in politics, right, even in your own life, you talk to people. Your doctor tells you something, you get a second opinion. So even at an individual level, this experimentation and feedback is crucial. If you're an entrepreneur, it's crucial. If you read, about lean startups and minimally viable products, the whole theory there is that you put something out that works, but you don't over-engineer it, because what you need is the feedback. You need the feedback on how people are using it, what they like, what they don't like, because you know what? Oftentimes an entrepreneur doesn't know. They have an idea, but then they need the data and the feedback. And some of that feedback will say you're wrong. This is what should be done. And some will say you're right. But so even in business, this notion of experimentation to find the truth is key to advancement, key to better products, key to better services. That's why you get all those surveys all the time, right? They want to know. Feedback, good or bad, that's how we're going to change. It's how we're going to find whatever the truth of the matter is. So experimentation. And another thing, too, I want to point out with experimentation. We seem to have an assumption that for truth, it's going to be one thing. I'm going to come back to that. And it's always going to be that. That's the truth. The alpha and the omega, if you wish. Well, I want to touch on the time piece here, that it's always the truth. And truth is, no, it's not. At an individual level, we go through phases in life, right? We're different at 2 years old than we are at 20, than we are at 40, than we are at 80. And it might be that things that were really good for me at 20 are insanely bad for me now, right, in middle age, right? Doesn't mean that it wasn't the truth at the time. It was. But it can change. Now, how am I going to know if that does? Well, I got to be free to seek out. I got to be free to find feedback. I got to be free to explore doctors and, people's opinions and read, right? What other people write about, right? On how to change jobs or how to exercise or what to eat. This doesn't naturally come to any individual. I need all those free voices out there. Some of those voices are just like, you're crazy. But other voices, they speak to me. And it's like, okay, I'm going to try that. So the notion that the truth is always that, well, maybe not. Okay. Some truths, maybe. Other truths, maybe not. How am I going to know which? Well, once again, we need the feedback. So, even if some central authority ultimately got like what the truth is right at that moment, okay. But there's absolutely no guarantee that that's going to be the same situation, the same thing, and the same truth that's going to hold over time, right? Circumstances will change, the world will change, and maybe some aspects of that, I'm not saying everything, but some aspects of that will need to change too. But we won't know which, once again, if you can't criticize it. It's just, you have to be able to criticize it. and postulate alternatives, right? And the government needs to keep out of that because the government is the ultimate silencer. So even if you know the truth at the moment, and even if you think that enforcing that truth at this moment is entirely the right thing, you got to recognize that that's going to change over time, or at least aspects of it will change over time. Right? Look at the evolution of intellectual property. Right? Look at what people didn't have to worry about in the 1700s that they do now with property in general. Right? Still have property rights. Okay, that part's true. But how those property rights find their way in the world, how they're instantiated in people's lives and in business, it evolves. Because once again, there are things now, right? We had to figure out how much air above your house do you own? Before airplanes, that wasn't a worry, was it? But now with airplanes flying over, yeah. When's an airplane trespassing? Had to figure that out, right? So that's what even if you think you're absolutely right, it's going to change, okay? And guess what? If you're absolutely wrong, things might change too. Your opinion might change. Others might change your opinion. Or circumstances in the world might change that actually make you right, okay? So even if you're wrong, be free to say what you say. And people say, well, why are we allowing people who we know are wrong to say, well, because I don't know they'll always be wrong, quite frankly. May come a time when what they say actually then does make sense. How will I know? Once again, got to hear them speak. So there's this whole notion of experimentation. Experimentation between ideas, all these competing ideas out here, and also experimentation over time. Maybe the ideas stay the same, but then the world changes. We need to adjust to that, right? We need to adjust to the world. And in order to figure out how best to adjust, we have to be able to criticize whatever viewpoints, theories, etc. are currently in place, in vogue, whatever else, so that we may then switch or adopt better policies and adapt, okay? So there's that experimentation model. There's also the idea, let's throw this one out there, that you know what? We're individuals, and there's something special about being individuals. And in this case, special about being human individuals. I'm not commenting whether animals do or don't have rights, but I'm talking about human beings here. Like what rights, right? And free speech. And, we're capable of making our own choices. We have our own reasons. We have our own brains. And no matter what your judgment of other people are, they're probably trying to do the best that they can. Now, some that really works out well in the world, and others it turns out they're really wrong, trying to do their best. But once again, you know what? That's their lives. That's their path that they're seeking. And what gives me the right to choose somebody else's path? People will talk about Locke's second treatise of government, right? Declaration of Independence says, Thomas Jefferson writes, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It came from John Locke's second treatise in government, where he talks about that human beings have the right to life, liberty, and property. But why? Well, what people often forget, or they don't read anymore because they think it's silly to read. Look at Locke's first treatise. Locke's first treatise is dedicated to proving that monarchs are not the descendants of Adam. Because you have the divine right of monarchy, right? The monarch says, you have to follow my will, not only because I have the sword, but because I am a descendant of the divine. I speak for God, says the monarch. It is my divine right. And therefore you must bow, kneel, die, whatever, because I said so, and I am the ultimate authority. And Locke just shreds that. There's no divine lineage anywhere. Nobody can trace their roots back to Adam or whoever else you wish to trace it back to. It's just not going to happen. That family tree doesn't exist. Now, is this something that's just like a weird, Locke just wants to go into people's family trees or their heritage or whatever, and he's just kind of focused on that? No. Well, first he wants to disprove the divine right of kings, but I think something bigger comes out of this. And the bigger thing that comes out of this is that none of us are God. Zero. We're all on the same footing here. We're all people with brains. They're using them to make decisions and make choices and trying to make our way in the world. There is nobody who has the natural authority to choose for somebody else. You can force other people to make choices. Absolutely. You can have a gun or a sword or prisons or whatever. But that doesn't give you the right, because you're on the same footing that they are. in terms of being able to actually make the choices. So what does that leave you? Leaves you speech, leaves you writing. If you want other people to change their behavior, you got to show it how it makes sense for them. And, that's tough work, really hard work. A lot of people don't want to put in that work. Tough. You have to convince that other mind that what you're trying to tell them to do, or that you think it would be better for them to do, actually is. And you have to convince them. And if you fail to convince them, you don't get to force them, because you're your chooser. You're the person in charge of your life, right? I might not like what you say or whatever, but that's your choice. And you get to make it because you're an individual human being, and hands off, right? We have this moral space. I can't invade, right? If I do, it's assault or murder or worse or whatever. So that's the second reason. So the first is this experimentation argument. The second is we have, as human beings, we have what you might call autonomy, right? We have this ability to choose, and that we're in charge of our own lives, and that nobody out there naturally has the authority to decide that for us. And now they can get power, right? You can get into the political system and obtain power, but that power doesn't give you authority or legitimacy to then silence other people. I'll come back to this, okay? But you're going to say, well, there are exceptions. Maybe. I want to talk about that with the next thing I want to talk about. So when we're talking about truth, now you got to focus on this, because people just like, when you say this, they go, bleh, and that's not what we want to do. Maybe there's more than one truth, right? People tend to be monists about truth. There's one truth. You look at philosophers are like this, right? You have to have one truth. It's just one. And people are like, this is the truth. That's all wrong. And sometimes, yeah, okay? Sometimes, yeah. But oftentimes, the human condition, right? The condition that we live in is that there are multiple truths. And we have to choose among them. So how best to live my life in middle age? Guess what? There's more than one option. There's several options. And you know what? They're all, in their own merits, all right. There's nothing wrong about them. There's nothing false about them. There's nothing untrue about them. But being one person with one life, I will have to choose one path. And so once I do, then the others won't be right for me. Doesn't mean that they are fake life paths, right? Fake news. Just means I had to choose one. Go back to the two arguments I said, that the two arguments supporting free speech. You'll actually find these two arguments, moral arguments, and even political arguments, across the spectrum. Somebody might argue, let's do a cost-benefit analysis, right? Experimentation is good because it leads to good consequences, good outcomes, right? Look at how much better off we are. Right? I want to do a cost-benefit analysis and see which one amounts to more happiness or more money or more whatever. And that is a legitimate way to approach moral problems. Solving things requires resources. How am I going to best spend my resources? Well, I have to keep track of them. So there's cost-benefit analysis. Is that the only way to approach things? Absolutely not. There's this other way, like I talked about, that we are adult human beings capable of rational deliberation and then choosing on the basis of our deliberation. And that makes us special, morally special, such that everybody then is on an equal footing. We all get the brains and the stuff, and well, you choose yours and I choose mine, and I can't interfere with you. You're an adult. You're an individual. We could say you have rights. We have many ways of expressing this, correct? And philosophers then will get into these fancy things, right? Well, what if killing one innocent person saved 100 lives, blah, blah, blah. When philosophers do that, they're trying to find out what the one theory is. What I'm trying to say is that half of life is trying to figure out which of these perspectives really applies in which cases. Do I really want to take a cost-benefit analysis here, or am I going to be like, no, rights and autonomy, right? In my own life, in other people's lives, in my household, in business decisions, whatever the case may be, we got to figure out which way we want to take. How am I going to analyze this? How am I going to proceed? It doesn't make the other theory wrong. It just means you don't think it applies here, and that this one does. But maybe in another instance, somewhere down the road, you're like, no, it's wrong to do a cost-benefit analysis here. We really have to treat these people as people, and if that's a bit expensive or whatever, it doesn't matter because, right, trial by jury is expensive. So what? People deserve a fair trial. Okay, right? So we have two truths in the world. Does that mean anything goes? Right? Since I've given up the one and I've said, oh, now there's maybe a couple truths, probably more than that. Right? Does that mean that anything goes? No. It's a dumb overgeneralization. People would just look at it. I never said that. Just as I said, there might be a few or several paths for me that would all kind of work in life, and then I choose one. Doesn't mean that anything goes, right? Like, oh, now I guess you're saying you can take heroin all day and blah, blah. No, nobody said that. I'm just saying that if you're focused on the one truth, this is the truth to be enforced, you're assuming from the get-go there's only one. But what if there's two? You've excluded half the world of truth, right? And with the two theories that I just talked about, are you going to say nobody has rights ever? Or are you going to say that a cost-benefit analysis is never the right way to try and approach something, to try and figure out what you really ought to do? I don't see. I think that would be insane. That's my free speech. I think excluding one of these. No, we have to talk about which one to use. We have to talk about how we want to approach these problems. We have to, because there are two equally plausible ways out there. And to silence people and say, I don't want to hear any more about that autonomy stuff, or I don't want to hear any more about that cost benefit stuff, because that's just a wrong-headed way to do it. Right? And I've heard people. I heard people on the left and the right. I've heard people on the left often talk about how cost-benefit analysis is evil. And I'm hearing people now, what's called the right, talking about these things that rights, they're just too expensive and too much of a hassle. And we need to be able to do. And so I'm not making this up. I mean, there are people out there, and they're arguing, or doing more than arguing, to enforce a viewpoint that excludes one of these two fundamental approaches to the world. And that's devastating. And if you don't believe me, take a day, take a week, and just write down how you approach matters like, right, you're going to decide who gets to use the car today, or how you're going to divide your time up and your obligations and work and family or whatever else in your own free time. Just take a tab and just write down, are you using a cost-benefit analysis here, or are you like, okay, they get to choose? And you know what? I'll bet you use both. Might not be at the same ratio, but you use both. So, free speech, because there might be more than one truth. Might, okay? So, have to be able to see that. Now, in fundamentals. So where are we with those fundamentals? Well, we've actually came down to two, interestingly enough. A cost-benefit analysis argument in favor of free speech, and an argument based on autonomy and human rights for free speech. Notice that ethical arguments and moral arguments do not depend in any way, shape, or form on these fundamentals where you're born. I mean, these are ethical ways to reason wherever you are in the world. And this is what makes, when it hits the news, horrendous things that happen in other countries. Why are they horrendous? I guarantee you, they violate one of these. They're causing immense human suffering, or they're violating rights, or probably both at the same time. So these are things that cover everybody, whether they're within the borders of the United States or outside the borders of the United States. Now, the thing is U.S. citizens and the U.S. government don't really have all that much control over what happens in a country and another country. But we do have control what happens here. And we can go down the right path, or we can go down the wrong path. And the argument being put forward here is that the moral path, whether one thinks it's in the First Amendment or not, the moral path is still allowing people to freely talk. Now, there are benefits to that, I believe, in experimentation and making the country stronger by constantly reviewing the principles we operate on, making the country stronger because then it is a country that defends people's rights. That's one of the reasons we started the country. Well, not we, but those who did, right? And both of those together. But that's the argument I put forward, and that's the foundations. Ethics, pure and simple. Now, a couple other things I just want to put out there as addendums. There is a difference between private and government, right? So the government bears this monopoly on guns and force, legitimate force, supposedly. So, yeah, when they ban something, hideous consequences. People get put in jail, or Even worse, depending on the government. But what about private citizens? Do they have the right to do that? Well, remember the arguments that I talked about. You're capable of making your own decisions. You may not wish to associate with people who espouse certain beliefs and things. That's your right. You don't have to associate with them. You don't have to serve them. You don't have to do anything. You are free to make your own choices based on what you hear other people say, and vice versa, by the way. That cuts both ways. So we're not free of the consequences of free speech. So this isn't some argument I'm offering here that since free speech ought to be left alone by the government, that means that you ought to be able to say whatever you want to say, and then nobody has the right to criticize you, because that's no, it's actually precisely the opposite's the point. If you say something, everybody has a right to criticize you, and that can make it tough to take unpopular opinions or whatever. But that's the nature of free speech. It's not a comfy world. It's a better world, I would argue, but it's not a comfortable one. You got to stick your head up. You got to take a stand. You got to be willing, right, to suffer the slings and arrows. If you're a scientist, same thing, right? Other scientists are going to disagree with you. They're going to take it to you. You're going to take it to you hard. You're in the game. We're in the game of life. Now, does that then mean, because people tend to go to extremes, that all private sort of association choices are good? I don't think so. Right? Now, it's their right of association. I went to a very, very conservative college, and I enjoyed my time there. A lot of good people. But yeah, there was a bit of private silencing going on. Certain views were acceptable, certain views weren't. Certain views were championed, and certain views were definitely not championed. I wasn't a student there. If you were faculty who wanted to talk about something else, bye-bye. Saw it happen. Do I think that was smart for the institution? Nope. Do I think it made it a better college? Nope. I think it made it a weaker college, right? But guess what? It's their freedom of association, so they get to choose. But that doesn't mean, once again, that they're free from criticism. And it doesn't even mean that they've made the best choices. They may have, from their point of view. From mine, they didn't. But especially when it comes to institutions of learning, it seems contrary. Once again, go to the purpose. If the purpose is to learn, and if learning requires alternate viewpoints, then even at a private university, you ought to encourage that. From all sides, you ought to encourage a just maelstrom, of different ideas, so that students get the experience of critically thinking about which they want to choose. Okay? So even at the private realm, you can choose poorly. Does that mean it should be illegal or whatever? I never said that. But once again, if you say that privately individuals should be able to say whatever they want or associate how they want, then people will go to extremes like, well, then you can't criticize anything. No, never said that. We have all the tools we need to criticize, right? Do a cost-benefit analysis or look at people's rights. But to go back to this final point, or go back to what we were talking about, governments is a whole different matter, all right? And one last, I'll talk about this at another time. The courts currently do not look at business speech the same way they look at political speech. Political speech gets typically really protected. Business speech, states can regulate, silence. Why? If we looked at the fundamental reasons about experimenting to find the truth, that's exactly what businesses do, right? If we look at individuals making their own choices and paths in life, yep, that's true in the commercial world as it is anywhere else. And yet, people don't view it that way. So I'll leave you with that thought, that everything said about here about free speech, we need to think hard about applying to business. So thank you for joining us today. Fundamental ethics. Argument is everybody should be allowed to speak freely. Makes for a better world, and it respects individual rights. Okay? That's the argument that's out there. If you've liked the video, if you've liked the thoughts that we've shared today, please hit the like button, subscribe. If you've made it this far, please do. And you know what? A lot of other great videos on the site, both short and long form. Please take a look at some of the other videos. You might find something. Actually, I bet you will. Especially if you stayed to the end. You're going to find something that interests you. So thank you very much for joining us. It's been my pleasure, and I look forward to reading your comments. Have a good day.